But it also, when you listen to podcasts, like hours and hours of podcasts, you kind of get used to the voice, and you feel like you know this person
Yeah.
despite that you never met, and this person don't even know you
I'm
exist.
glad I know you guys exist.
Oh.
The same.
I remember a year ago when I signed for taking part of it in the podcast, and I was like, never gonna get it. And then like this summer, it's like I got email and I was at work and I was like, no, no, this is a mistake. No. And half of the day at work, I was like, what I'm supposed to do? Like, what I'm supposed to do? I never did a podcast.
Yeah. No, the Witcher community is so small. Come on. Come on, everybody. Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from GoodMorhen, and I'll be your host as I enter international Hanza, accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny, Cirilla of Cintra, across the continent. Major congratulations to the Actors Union, which joins the Writers Union on closing their strike. Obviously, we've been holding off on talking about the Netflix series while the strike has been going on, and now that it's resolved, really looking forward to hosting conversations about this series and these episodes with fans from our international community. After this podcast season covering Time of Contempt ends on Thursday, December 14th, we'll take a break, as per usual, and return for our Lost The Witcher Season 3 episodes on Thursday, April 4th, 2024. Everything from Season 3 Part 1 was recorded prior to the strike, and we'll be recording Part 2 after the strike in the coming months. So it'd be really interesting to see how perception has changed, how the season has aged, and what people feel, about a year later. So we're looking forward to that. As for this episode, we welcome Becca to our Hanza on Patreon. They join our producer-level patrons, Katie the Redhead Gisant, Jacob B, Behaving at the Edge of the World, Charlotte from Bangor Glamorai, The Original Roach, Codringer's Cat, Libby John of Riblia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, James Carson III, Miriam of Temeria, and Softy. As for this episode, Gabriela from Poland and Kája from the Czech Republic call in for Andrzej Sapkowski's Time of Contempt, Chapter 6. Join us as we discuss how Ciri's trial in the desert transforms her, the importance of her loved ones, Little Horse, dialects and translations, and her Time of Contempt. Without further ado, let's get to our discussion of Time of Contempt, Chapter 6. Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair. My name is Alyssa, and today we're welcoming two members of our Hanza to the show. My first guest hails from Poland, where they work as an environmental engineer. They're a lover of stories and a proud collector of books and book-related things. My second guest is a web developer from the Czech Republic who also teaches programming for an NGO that brings women into IT. They love food, sports, and have a special passion for reading. Please welcome Gabriela from Poland and Kája from the Czech Republic. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hi.
Hi,
Hello.
it's really an honor to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you both on. We are now 2 for 2 in guests from the Czech Republic and Poland. And I'm really
Yay.
excited to hear what you guys have to say about the books, the translations, and the cultural references, and really excited to hear all the things that you're able to bring to today's discussion. But before we get into that, let's start off. Classic question. How did you both get into the Witcher series?
In Poland, it's hard not to acknowledge The Witcher, especially that the movies also came out. The movie and the TV series, Polish version, came out in early 2000. And so I was like, I don't know, 3-4 years old when they came out. So I was kind of always aware of that. There are books, there's movie, there's TV series. I seen some scenes when I was a kid. Never watched like a whole movie. And later, of course, the games came out, and my cousin showed me the game, told me most of the story from the book. When the TV series on Netflix was coming out, I decided like I need to read this. Like it's Polish fantasy. I'm reading everything else, but not this. Like, I have to read it. And finally, the TV series motivates me to read it, and I never looked back.
I love that. What about you, Kája?
Yeah, so for me, The Breakfast in Beauclair is one of the main reasons I'm into Witcher, because um, when I was growing up, when I was 15, 16, everybody around me was reading Witcher. It was extremely popular in Czech Republic, and everybody got into that. But it was so hyped that I was almost repulsed by that hype, and I never read it at the time. And then later, it was on my reading list, but it was kind of intimidating to have such a long series of books. So I always kept it on my reading list. And then when COVID happened, I said to myself, okay, now you have time to read the series, so let's get it. I was discussing with my flatmate at the time if I should start from the short stories or from the saga. Unfortunately, I didn't listen to her, and I start with short stories, and I don't like them very much.
Really?
Yeah, I found them to be very aggressive. The characters are not someone I wanted to relate to, and there is not enough context in the world to be immersed in it. So after the first book, I was just stuck there, and I didn't want to even finish the series. But after that, I found Breakfast in Beauclair, and the discussion about the books, even the short story books, was so interesting, and the context you guys were bringing in was so interesting to me that I just went through the second short story book, which was also not good for me. But then I started with Blood of Elves, and after that, I finished the series like in a couple of weeks. And it's one of my favorite fantasy book series I've ever read.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. I feel like for a lot of people, a lot of them tend to gravitate toward the short stories. I personally gravitate toward the end of the saga. But how funny that like that Breakfast in Beauclair had a part in your story with The Witcher as well. How did you find the show?
Actually, through Mike Schubert's podcast when you
Oh,
were
there we go.
guest on it. Yeah.
Did you also find it through Mike Schubert's podcast, Gabriela? Because you're
Yes,
laughing.
same here. Also, like, I read the short stories and I was like, yeah, they are good. But also, like, after listening to Breakfast in Beauclair, I was like, oh, there's so much more in that, which I didn't even consider while reading. So
It's so funny hearing you guys talk so highly about some of the earliest episodes of the podcast. I feel like listening back to them or thinking back to them, I'm like, wow, that was 4 years ago. I hope the podcast has gotten better since then. And I'm so glad that you guys found it and that you're here along for the ride. And more so, even guests.
yeah.
That's amazing. I really have to give Mike Schubert, like, I don't know, donuts or something for all of the guests that have been on the show that they're just like, yeah, I found you through like the newest Olympian. That's very, very funny. Maybe I'll send him a fruit basket or something. Today we'll continue our discussion of Andrzej Sapkowski's Time of Contempt, Chapter 6, in which Ciri journeys alone through the Korath Desert after teleporting across the continent through the Tower of the Gull. Here's a quick synopsis of the chapter from future Alyssa. In Chapter 5, Ciri wakes alone in a desert, having ran into the Tower of the Gull in an attempt to escape Vilgefortz, Cahir, and the Scoia'tael on the Isle of Thanedd. She treks across the desert, searching for food, water, and shelter, aided by some basic magic for light and warmth. After days of thin survival, she accepts her death, only to be found by a real unicorn foal. Little Horse, as she names him, and Ciri keep each other company and help the other forage and survive. They encounter a giant sand beast, which gravely injures Little Horse with its venom. In a fit of desperation, Ciri channels fire magic to heal the unicorn. It works, but the fire consumes her and shows her a vision of the continent ravaged and her loved ones dead. Horrified, she renounces her magic, and the release of power brings rain to the Korath Desert. Little Horse, known by its species as Ihuarraquax, is found and disappears, leaving Ciri empty and alone again, only to be found by Nilfgaardian trappers. So, now that we've gotten a quick recap of the chapter from future Alyssa, I'd love to get to talk to both of you about your overall thoughts on Chapter 6.
It's different when you're reading a whole book and you just want to go through the plot. And now I had like changed to focus on one chapter to
Mm.
like really think it through and like read both in English and in Polish to be more aware of the vocabulary used in the English version. And I really like started to enjoy more this chapter. Like I appreciated the description of the desert. Like it's so vivid. Like especially that I also partly was listening to the Polish audiobook, which is
Mm.
great. It's like the full cast of actors, like each character has its own voice, and there's different narrator, and they're like sounds, background sounds, like they put you more in this space. So it was like it felt like I'm really there with Ciri, like going through the pain, the heat, the cold. The descriptions were like really great. It was so immersive.
Wow. Yeah, I haven't heard much about the Polish audiobooks, but a full cast recording sounds amazing.
Yeah, when you hear the character, you know who it is because each has their own voice. So it's really like, and especially in The Witcher, you get so many different characters, and I think if there would be one like person reading it, it would you would be lost quite quickly because you wouldn't know who speaks what. But with this, it's like I know it's Geralt, I know it's Ciri, I know their voices. It's really quick to recognize
Mm.
who speaks when. And also like there's like some background music, some background like sounds that they put you more in the space where they are, whether it's like desert or there are fighting, there are like sounds of swords or screaming people when someone is dying. It really feels like you're there. I'm going like through shopping mall, but I'm like truly in the Witcher universe. So yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Same amount of chaos in a shopping mall as
Yeah,
in The Witcher.
exactly.
What about you, Kaya? What did you think of this chapter?
I read through The Witcher only once, and some parts I read twice or thrice. But I really remember when I read chapter 6 for the first time, because it provides such a change of pace in the book.
Mhm.
Uh, we come from the chapter 5 when Emir is dictating some instructions to his puppets, basically, and suddenly we are we come from this very intense conversation to this very intimate scene with Ciri. We are here alone with her. It's silent, and she's in a very dire situation. But suddenly, even though she's in much danger, I feel like we are in this dreamlike state in this scene. We take a little break from all the politics, from all the intrigues, and we just focus on this scene and this survival of Ciri. And that's what I'm here for, you know.
Mhm.
I'm not much of a politic analytical guy. I'm more here for the vibes. I'm more here for the personal experiences and personal emotions going through the main characters, and that's what I really get here in chapter 6.
I was thinking about it, and I feel like we haven't had a chapter like this kind of isolation, this kind of like internal turmoil and character development since maybe like the very first Witcher short story where Geralt is fighting the Striga, maybe something more at the end of Sword of Destiny. But he's with Yurga for a lot of that chapter, but he's obviously internal as he's thinking back to all of these memories and things like that. But the majority of the Witcher books really deal with like interpersonal relationships and dialogue. That's really where Sapkowski's writing shines in handling those personal relationships and that conflict. So when we bring that conflict internally and we spend an entire chapter with Ciri on her own, it's such a stark difference to everything else we've experienced in The Witcher and particularly in Time of Contempt. This has been a intense but light book so far. We've gone through the Thanid coup, but we were hanging out in Goris Velen for a while. Geralt was kind of puttering about the continent as well. We met Codringer and Fen. We were chilling out with Applegat for a while. And while the war is going on, though, it's fast-paced, it's political. And then we just stop for an entire chapter. It's just Ciri and this desert. And the way that it's written is, I think, shockingly compelling, given that there's no landscape in one character, right? Like, but we get to hear her internal struggle and her thoughts, the desperation that she goes through in order to survive. Sapkowski writes it in such a way that, like, even her looking for food and water, we're sitting on the edge of our seat, wanting to see this character win and survive. And I really enjoy that about this chapter, and it's so incredibly unique.
I was thinking throughout the whole chapter, why should Ciri care about all the politics? Why should she care about the war, about what happened with the cube? Of course, she cares because the Nilfgaardians killed her family. And of course, she cares because she has her stakes. But ultimately, she has, in my eyes, very little motivation to be involved in everything. This chapter is kind of putting her out of that place and solving herself, her development, which will be defining in next story.
Were there any parts of this chapter in particular that were a highlight or low light for you? I know for me, some of the standout moments were, of course, Ciri and Little Horse, through the back half of the chapter. It was really nice for her to have a friend. The battle with the weird bulbous sand creature, and obviously the ending, Ciri renouncing her magic. Such a major critical point, and we'll talk about all of these things as well. Anything specific stood out to you guys?
For me, it was Ciri was really in low point where the little horse was sick and dying, and she was like angry, like they didn't told me how to kill. They told me how to kill. That's how they told me I will help people, and that was like really like powerful moment
Yeah.
From this chapter, especially that she's still a kid and she's going through so much. That definitely was like a great moment, and the whole and the same, like the last words of the chapter,
Hmm.
like when she was picked by those people, and she didn't care that even the rider was wearing a helmet with the wings of a bird of prey. It was like, oh my god, like what's happening? Like
Yeah.
why he's there? Like that was her worst nightmare, and she don't care anymore. Like nothing is
Yeah.
important anymore. Like that was really powerful.
Yeah, for me, it's again the really quick change of pace. In the beginning, we have a lot of pages when firstly Ciri is struggling alone through the desert. Then she finds a little horse, um, and they are struggling together. But then in the end, there is so many things packed in just a couple of pages that suddenly I had to reread the last 3 pages like 6 times to really absorb everything that was there, because suddenly from nice story, nice survival story from the desert, there everything changes. Little horse is dying. Ciri is doing something that she was told is forbidden, and it changes perspectives a couple of times on a couple of pages, and that's amazing.
Yeah, there's so much that happens in this chapter, and I think it's really deceiving when you just explain, like, yeah, the character's just in a desert by herself for an entire chapter. And there's so much growth and so many critical events that happen here that change Ciri forever. And I'm so excited to dig into it with you guys as well. I love speaking to people about the different translations or the original, in your case, Gabriella, and anything that you guys that stood out to you.
for me, it was like one thing that really surprised me, and I wonder why they changed it. When at the beginning of chapter, when Ciri realized that she has still her sword and she has like this little pouch that Yennefer gave her. In English version, there's like three things. There's the comb, there's the nail file,
Mhm.
and there's a J pod with hand lotion, but the J pod is like covered with a piece of fabric. In the Polish version, it's there's a bit different because she still has a comb, she still has a knife file, but it's like a little knife,
Mhm.
so it's like a little bit different. And she gets it's called tampon in Polish, which is
Yeah,
also the
it's the
same
same in
meaning in
English.
English,
Yeah.
but it also has in Poland the second meaning, which is a piece of fabric that you put on a wound that to stop bleeding. And she has this specific item.
Mm,
And then there's also she had like this jade pot with hand lotion or
right.
whatever she had.
Ointment.
So it's like in English version she has like it's additional thing to cover the pot. In Polish is like specific thing to probably use when she has her period or
Right.
like when she has some wound. So it's like a little bit different, but it's like it gives different like kind of the way she thinks. Like she has like, oh, this fabric that the
Mhm.
pot was covered, oh, I will use it for my hair. And then she has like, okay, this is the thing I will use when I have my period, I have my wound. And then she used it for her hair also to cover from the sun, but she also had like a wound on her head.
Yeah.
So that was the difference. Like it's not a big difference, but it
Mm-mm.
was like I was wondering why, because it kind of changed the way it implies that she thinks.
Yeah. Do you know which translation of the English edition you read? Because the one I read had those 4 or 5 items and the tampons separately. And me
Okay.
as an American reader, when I read tampon, I think of like a tampon used for menstruation. But it does explicitly say, and I assumed, I was like, oh, this is an old-timey tampon where it's like wrapped fabric, as opposed to the cotton ones we have in modern day. So for me, I just assumed this is a medieval tampon. Great. But I wouldn't have had the additional context of the duplicity of the word in Polish
Yeah,
as well.
yes. So it was like I don't know in who translated the version that I was reading. So
Mm.
that and the second one, the moment when she has the power, the force she uses from the fire, she speaks like she can grow vegetable. And
Yeah.
she in Polish version she says different one than at least in the version that I read, because in the English version it's kale, and
Oh.
in the Polish version it's kohlrabi. Don't
Oh,
know
I
how to
read cabbage.
pronounce it. Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
So there are three different versions.
Yeah. It was one of those things that stood out to me because as she's like going through the fire, she's like, I could do anything. I can make cabbages. And I was like, I was like, good for you, babe. We'll set
Oh
our
my
sights
god.
low.
Yeah, yeah. So there's this difference. So I don't know. Also, maybe it's more common in English to use kale or cabbage.
Maybe you're reading a British version and I'm reading an
Maybe.
American version? I was almost rude and said English version. Oops. Maybe it's like a difference between the British and the American
Yeah, it could
editions.
be.
Yeah. That's interesting to note. Kale feels very like 2015 millennial to me.
Yeah, exactly.
We had a phase. We had a phase. It doesn't really change the story, but it's certainly a choice. We hear about a lot of those choices across, I think, all of the translations. And it's always just like little words here and there or untranslatable words, which is interesting. Kaya, anything that stood out to you in the Czech version?
I will start in the English version, if I may, because the first thing I found a little bit silly is the translation of a little horse. I think in Polish, Gabriela, tell me if I'm wrong, but in Polish, is it konik also?
Yeah,
As in
it's
Czech?
conic. Yeah.
Okay. So the translation to English is very literal, and I don't know, Alyssa, would you, if you would meet some unicorn in the desert, would you say, "Hey, little horse"? Because I was feeling like a horsey or something like that would be much better
Yeah.
translation. But yeah, there was something that it's not going through my mouth very well. Little horse, you know.
Mhm. Diminutive forms of nouns aren't as common in English as they are in, Polish and I assume Czech. We had this conversation around Yennefer calling Ciri ugly duckling or things like that, my ugly one. And I remember, I think I was talking to Anita and Carolina then, so obviously Polish, and they were, if I remember correctly, slightly upset that they're just like, it's not that mean. It comes across very mean in English. We don't quite have the same, like horsey, maybe, like you said,
Yeah,
might be something more akin to that diminutive form, but and for like it happens across all of the books whenever they try to translate nouns like that. And now that we've gotten some of our overall thoughts on the chapter, translations, what do you guys believe this chapter in the Korath Desert signifies in Ciri's journey and in the greater saga?
I think it's like really important moment for Ciri, for who she will become in the future. Like I think we can see the glimpse of who she's becoming in this chapter. Like we know that she could like give up like in the same beginning, like the of the chapter, like she's in the middle of the desert, she's lost in the world. She says like she doesn't remember like knowing the where the desert is in the like whole world, and she doesn't know where to go, where she is, only know more or less how she get there. She's hurt and she's hungry and she's thirsty, and in this like moment, like so many people would give up, especially like she's only 14.
Mhm.
It stick to my head like reading is like, oh my god, I wouldn't live through that, and she's only like 14, like oh
Yeah.
my god. And but she has like this will to live, to survive this. Like she, despite the pain, she's like keep walking, like despite that she's falling many times, she's standing up, and it shows her character, and it shows also who she will be in the future.
yeah. When I was reading through, I was constantly asking myself when she finds her strength
Yeah.
to do what she does, because um, other people maybe would think that she is doing it because of her love to Geralt or Yennefer or anybody else, but they are mentioned in the chapter only twice. Once when she remembers what they taught her about witcher stuff and sorcerer stuff,
Mhm.
and the second instance is when she is sad that everyone betrayed her or left her alone, and she's alone, and there is no tone of I'm doing it for somebody else, I have to be strong for somebody else. She is strong for herself and she powers through.
Mm.
And I was like, where does she finds her strength? Because I would probably give up after the first day when she finds herself under the same stone she
Yeah.
started. And in the book, there's like she has no strength to even cry. But I cried for her. I was like, come on, it's
Yeah.
so unfair. I would die here and there. Yeah,
I know. No, I'm the same. I'm like, I'm just gonna lie down right here and I'm never gonna get back up again. That's gonna be me. um, yeah, I I have that question as well. Like, she has so much resolve. Or I really do think a lot of it comes down to desperation and just like a deep survival instinct. But how we get to see how she struggles with that. Like, I think despite a sense of survival, and a desire to get out of the desert, she still, thinks about every possibility. Like, what if she dies here? There are hawks circling me, or there are vultures circling me. Um, blood is liquid. I can drink that. And it's like, oh my God. Um, we get to see every stage of her mental state kind of like deteriorate and become more desperate, in various ways, which is interesting, when she's alone, when she's a little horse, and so on. This chapter in the Korath Desert I find really interesting, just because it's not like it's a pretty poorly kept secret that, the saga is really Ciri's story. Like, we talk about that pretty openly on the podcast, that, like, yeah, it's called The Witcher, but, like, guys, it's not about Geralt at all.
Yeah.
And we're pretty open about that here at Breakfast in Beauclair. But I do think that when we look at, for example, the literary concept of the hero's journey, um, it becomes apparently clear that, like, oh no, the next few books are going to be about Ciri specifically. Um, when we look at that, you have like the known, the status quo, and then the hero kind of like goes around, passes the thresholds into the unknown, does their whole little adventure, and then returns to their home or to the known, a newly changed person. It's a poorly kept secret that Geralt is a pretty fixed dude. And but this chapter in the Korath Desert, to me, is that clarity of, oh, we are crossing the threshold with Ciri. We are going from the status quo of, I think despite the loss at Cintra, her status quo is, I'm of royal heritage. I'm with Geralt and Yennefer. I'm a witcher. I'm a sorceress. And we're seeing her lose all of that in a second, and she's dumped across the threshold. And within this chapter, loses everything. This chapter is really what makes it clear that this is her story, and this is going to be her coming of age over the course of the books. It's a sudden shift. It's very powerful and spells a lot for the rest of the series as well.
Yeah, no notes.
Yeah, it really feels like series stories from now, like, and we have to start from this like with nothing.
Mhm.
It's really the beginning, but it's like really emotional and sad, like seeing her going through all of this. It's not like she loses everything in one moment. She does like piece by piece, and but she keeps her character, she keeps her strength. And I like in this chapter that she doesn't know everything. Like she
Mhm.
regrets not knowing the stars, but she uses them to her advantage despite the lack of knowledge. Like she names some of the stars in her way. She chooses one star that she will follow. She tries to use everything what she was taught by different people in different places. Like she remembers, like when she was in a temple where she would have to fast for like 2 days, and she was like, okay, I can do this. I can not eat for some time, but I need to find water. Like when she's fighting, she uses the reflex and the what she was taught by the witchers in the Kayamoran. So yeah, she uses everything what she like knows to her advantage. So yeah, it's like really a really great chapter to see who Ciri is.
Absolutely. To see not just who Ciri is, but as you said, who all of her influences are. We had spent, the end of Sword of Destiny, but really Blood of Elves and the beginning of Time of Contempt, understanding that she is a witcher girl sorceress. We see the extent of what she's learned, how to survive for herself, how to fight a certain kind of monster, how she assesses a situation, what she knows how to do, as we said, with the eating the ointment, with using the tampon as a bandage. And of course, all of the things that she's learned from Yennefer with looking for a source, with creating light for herself. And it gives her moments of excitement and moments of hope until she makes that ultimate sacrifice, and renounces her magic. But we get glimmers of hope throughout the chapter, and I think that is one of the things that both keeps us as a reader going, as well as Ciri going. Not just, again, her survival instinct is obviously a big thing, but the thought that she can get out of here, she can reach those mountains, she can find food, she has a companion in Little Horse, etc., etc. But goodness, yeah, it's really interesting to see how she uses everything that we've learned and how she hears different characters in her head throughout that experience. Kája, do you have any thoughts?
Not really. I'm listening to both of you, and I'm just agreeing with everything you are saying. And I have no original thoughts at this point.
I mean, the next question is from you. Little Horse as a character, as we learn, is actually called Ihuarraquax.
Oh, that's how it's pronounced. I never
I
knew.
assume that's me doing my best and also having Peter Kenny on like 3x speed in my ear. I think that's how he says it, Ihuarraquax. I don't know.
Sounds better in English than in Polish.
How does it sound in Polish?
It would be like harder. If I would have to say it in Polish, it would be Ihuarraquax.
I'm struggling to hear a difference.
I think it's a little bit harder than the way you pronounce it.
Yeah, I think like Peter Kenny gently cusps the like first syllable. Ihuara. Like I think that's how he says it, and then quacks. Is it the same in Czech? Was that translated or no?
No, it was not translated. But every time some name like this appears in some book, I don't even try to make sounds out of it. I just take it as is on a paper, and I just leave it alone.
We're just gonna skip over that mentally and just go to the next word.
Yeah, exactly.
But the pronunciation aside, why do you think Little Horse or Ihuarraquax was there in the story? What do you think his purpose was from a storytelling perspective and for Ciri?
From storytelling perspective, it's a wonderful vessel. It's a companion that Ciri really needs. And when I was reading it for the first time, I was really thinking for a long time that the little horse does not exist. It's only in her mind, and that she hallucinates just to have some kind of companion to go through this. From that perspective, she would not survive without a little horse. She would be dead in the middle of the desert. She would never find the water. From real perspective, in the world of Witcher, I really don't understand how the little horse found itself in the desert, and what was he doing there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's one of those things that I'm just like, Sapkowski's like, we need to fix this. Unicorn.
Yeah, it's like from story perspective, it's like it gives us hope, because before we meet the little horse, it's like there's no hope. Like she's going to die here, and then she feels the touch of the horse, and it's just like, is it mirage, or like is it true? So yeah, it gives us hope as a reader, and also to Ciri. But from the like reality perspective in the world, it's like the only explanation for me is like fate. Like Ciri is destined for different things. That's why the horse was there. Because also, like, why the hell unicorn? I would understand it. The unicorn was like at the beginning of the desert, like at the border of the desert with the normal land, but not like in the middle of the desert. Like how he survived there before Ciri. Like I don't know. It feels like someone put him in the like he had a map of desert and like, oh, there's Syria. I will put the the unicorn here.
We know too much about Sapkowski to know he had a map. That
Yeah.
man did not have a map. But yeah, it's an interesting one because I think, as you both have nailed, like for a reader and for Ciri herself, it's hope. We are she right before Ciri meets Little Horse. I think that's when like all of the vultures are circling her and she's like I'm ready to go. This is it. Like I'm going to die here. And we had been with her through her moments of desperation, as Kája said, the first night and first day coming back to exactly where she started and just feeling desperation. Finally, she kind of gets moving. The heat is beating down on her. She thinks she's going to die. And at that first moment where she really accepts death, that's where Little Horse comes in. And he is a baby. He doesn't know any better, turns out. Like, he can help her forage for food, which they do together. And in the English translation, it's like, this was a nice collaboration. But then it turns out Ciri's like, I think he's as lost as me, and I think we're screwed in that regard. So they try to kind of, put her out together. But I think also from a storytelling perspective, I think Sapkowski perfectly timed the amount of pages that we could be with one character by themselves until it gets either laborious or boring. And as soon as that happened, he's like, ooh, another character to change the situation and to also give Ciri something to react to. Both from a hope perspective, but also like, oh, the pace of the story is now slightly different. From a storytelling and writing perspective, it feels like we kind of did Act 1. Ciri has been on her own. Act 2 is that time with Little Horse. And then I think Act 3 is that surgence and loss of power. And then the tapering off that end of the chapter. But yeah, I feel like he's just like, she needs a friend for a bit from a hope and a storytelling perspective.
Yeah, and I would buy the version of Ciri like Little Horse is also lost the same as me. That gets kind of crushed. This theory gets kind of crushed in the end again for me with the being conversation.
Yeah. Kája, you also had a note about the translation of this beings between English, Polish, and Czech.
I was really surprised about the choice, and I'm not sure how is it in original Polish, but right in the end when Ciri uses the power of fire, and then there's this passage when some beings are overlooking the scene and are discussing the fate of Ciri. There are some changes between Czech and English translation, but the most influencing change is the change of punctuation, because Czech version does not contain any question marks, and after every sentence there's a period. But in English there are some question marks, and it completely changes the tone of the conversation. And also in English it feels like a dialogue. It feels like some beings are discussing, but in Czech it is very hard to view it as a dialogue, and you really have to read it a couple of times to get that there are several beings that are discussing this with each other. And that really surprised me. Such a basic change, like having question mark or not having question mark, is completely changing the tone of the text.
Yeah, that section's interesting in English just because I assume it's probably similar in Polish, where the way that the other unicorns speak is unusual. Like the manner and the words in which they speak and the grammar and the length of the sentences just feels weird. Like it feels a little bit alien. Um
Yeah.
They're just like, the being is dangerous, confirmation. They sound like robots in English. And I know that there's like similar notes, or I've gotten similar notes from guests in other translations where they ask, like, oh, is it also old timey in English? Um, what was it like reading it in the original Polish? How did Sapkowski differentiate between human characters and the unicorns?
It's definitely written differently. It's like you communicate with someone through the radio, like
Mm,
you check in, like
yeah,
something like that. And it's implied in Polish that it's a conversation between two beings, and it doesn't have like question marks like in the English version.
mm,
So, uh, but yeah, they talk about Ciri like not like a one person, but you have to understand them, and it's like the Siri is just like a being. Not they don't name her like I don't know a human or something. She's just a being for them. So yeah, you can know that it's someone else speaking,
yeah,
and I don't know why, but I imagine they are like unicorns, so they don't speak. So I was like, they communicate with minds, like
yeah.
they. So maybe that's why it feels like they talk through the radio, like.
Yeah, that's such a good analogy. Like it does very much sound like that, like hearing somebody over a radio. And that probably is like trying to relay telepathy in a specific way in writing. It's an interesting way to do that dialogue, that it feels militant almost, or very sterile. They're just like, should we kill this small child? And the way that it's written in English is the being should be divested of its beingness. It's like, who talks like that? But it is very interesting. And what a clever way to, as you said, communicate telepathy in writing.
Yeah, that was actually exactly my thought. As you said, it's written like it's militant. In Czech, in Polish, there are no question marks. Uh, it's almost like the being is dangerous. Confirmation. There's no real conversation. There's like it's really weird. And I wanted to ask, because I read this part of the text like really 10 times. Is there anything in original Polish that would give that this is really the other unicorns? Because I was reading Witcher Wiki, and I was reading all those sources, and everyone is on the same page. Those are the unicorns. But when I newbie to the Witcher universe and I'm reading it for the first time, I'm really I'm really, hesitant to say, yeah, those are the other unicorns.
In my opinion, from this part, I cannot say for 100% that they are unicorns.
Mm,
It's like they named the being Ihuarraquax.
yeah.
But it could be also some other being, like knowing the unicorn and discussing it, and that it's thanks to him that she's still with them. But I wouldn't say for 100% that they have to be unicorns. Maybe there's some other being, some greater power. Actually, when I read this, I was like, I didn't know who was it, and I didn't even thought that they are other unicorns. I thought about this after the question
Mm,
you wrote. So yeah, I wouldn't say for 100% there are other unicorns.
yeah. I assumed that they were other unicorns. I thought it was implied just because they contextually talked about Little Horse, like the being saved them. And also their actual name is Ihuarraquax. So I assumed that it was more of the same. Um, I also wonder if that's like a secret life of pets kind of thing of just like, yeah, I call my dog Piper, but like, is she known to something else to other dogs? They have like a secret society and secret world. Um, or that's just the way that my mind works. And I made the assumption that like, oh yeah, obviously it's other unicorns.
uh,
But it's interesting that it might be a little more open to interpretation, or that not everyone gets to that same conclusion.
Yeah, I think I was kind of influenced by the Discord. I think that's how you call it
Mm,
in English, the Terry Pratchett word. And then there you have the bigger beings, the gods, and it changes. So I was like reading this, and I thought like, okay, that's some kind of bigger being that knows what's going on. That was my first thought when I read this. But as I say, I could be influenced by the different word.
yeah. Oh, that's so
Yeah, yeah.
interesting.
But when I was, as I said, I went through Witcher Wiki. I went through different Reddit threads, and I was trying because I was feeling like I'm missing some part of the lore that is confirming exactly that
Mm.
this conversation is between unicorns. And I was just screaming at my screen, "Tell me the sources! Tell me the sources!" But I never found any, and it's frustrating to me because yeah, it seems very likely that those are unicorns, but for me it's still open.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if we get into quite the idea of celestial beings in The Witcher. Um, I'm gonna like tread lightly there, but I think like the concept of like celestial beings isn't really explored in this fantasy work. Um, so like it was the kind of thing that like for me didn't really register, but yeah, it's completely implied what these beings could be, and like they don't speak like anybody else we encounter in this very medieval based world. So it's certainly really interesting. Um and as we continue to look at the chapter and get toward the end, after we meet those beings and after they, chitter and disappear with Little Horse, or rather, I think we have right before those beings arrive, part of what, attracts them, we can assume, is Ciri's use of fire magic. We know the beings have seen her use it. That's why they decide she's dangerous. Um, but what do you guys think is the significance of Ciri's vision at the fire and also renouncing magic?
This is like the moment for me when I really wasn't sure when it's which way it's going to be for Siri. I think it's also like setting the stone for the future Siri, like who she is going to be, like the
Mhm.
decision she make, not only the decision she made to lose her power, but also the decision to not get revenge, uh like like getting revenge on all the people who hurt her, but there were also like people who she loved and she cared about, mentioned there. And I was thinking whether she would make the same decision if like the vision would skip some of the people,
Mm.
like if Yennefer wasn't there, or if the Geralt wasn't there, other Witchers, like Mother Neneke, like the people like who did her truly wrong. Like sometimes they make the wrong choices, and they might hurt her in a way, but also they cared for her, they loved her, they wanted to protect her in any possible way. And if not the vision of them being her, like what would be the decision? Like I think she was so full of power, and she was hurt, she felt betrayed, she felt lost, and yeah, I think it's really like a important moment for her, for who she will be and who she will become. And yeah, but it's just like the vision of it's terrifying.
I think you made a really good point, because uh, thanks to Geralt and Tien being in the vision, she had the opportunity to make the decision based on love, based on some positive emotions, rather than only focusing on what has being done wrong to her. And I'm also wondering what would happen differently if the vision was a little bit different. But also, I was, even though Yen and Geralt were in that vision, I was really impressed by the decisiveness, and she was being really clear that this is not what she wants.
Mhm.
She does not want to follow this path that the vision is clearly offering her, and that really speaks to her character. That really shows what is she made of, and we as readers can really experience what woman she is becoming.
As we've mentioned, she's been so protected by her royal heritage, by Geralt and Yennefer in turn. And now that she's on her own, as you said, Kaya, we're just seeing what she's made of and the resolve and the survival that she has. Um, One of the things I noticed about this chapter and about this vision particularly, aside from clinical mentions of blood, like for example, her having a wound on her head, or the fact that the little monster at the bottom of the pit is like a blood-sucking whatever. Aside from those mentions, this is the third time that blood is actually really talked about. The first two times are when she really thinks about like, oh, I could like blood is liquid, like and she gets to that desperate place twice. Rule of thirds, third time, it is an incredibly bloodlust filled vision of everyone she knows is dead at the scaffold, being beheaded, so on and so forth. And it's violent. It's violent and it's terrifying for her. And we had seen her consider that as soon as it becomes too much, that's when she chooses to renounce her magic. And it is the kind of thing that I think she is also scared of her own power. We had heard at the end of chapter 7 of Blood of Elves, when she's in the Temple of Melitele with Yennefer, that Yennefer forbids her from doing fire magic. She can use water, air, earth, but never fire. And we don't really hear much about it in the books. And she comes to the realization that, like, oh yeah, fire's a thing. She builds her little campfire, and she sets it aflame. And through that additional use of that voice or that figure, whoever they are, it's kind of, again, unclear who this figure is. If it is a manifestation of Falca, which we read about at the beginning of chapter 1 in one of the opening little excerpts. Codringer, I believe, also mentions Falca, that little children still play Burning Falca. There's a lot of pyres in the vision. Um, and but it's one of those things that we actually don't really know if this figure is Falca, let's say, or if it's some sort of like manifestation of fire magic or personification of fire magic itself. That's kind of unclear. But now we suddenly see why Yennefer is like never that, because it absolutely consumes you. And if Ciri were to pursue that, she would probably be on like a path of vengeance and bloodlust and revenge and fear. Um, but it takes the strength of her character to renounce that. And I wonder if, from a storytelling perspective, Ciri has been spoken up to be so insanely powerful in the context of this world, right? She has elder blood, she's a princess, she's a trained witcher, she's a ridiculously powerful sorceress and medium that started the Thanid coup. And from a writing perspective, it's like, can a character like this go on? And it's either one, interesting in the context of the story, or are they just too powerful for an actual hero's journey to occur? And I wonder both of those things because by the end of the chapter, she is at least one peg down. She's lost her powers. And I do wonder if that's also part of her losing them is so that she's not too strong, I think, for the rest of what comes, or too overpowered for the rest of the saga.
Yeah, that could be the reason. Like you said, she's like everything powerful in this world. Like she has magic, she is medium, she can fight. Like she is royal. She becomes to her family, and there are people who wants to use her as a pawn in the politics. So in this world, like, can you be more? Like she also has like the elder blood. Like, is there more to be? Like, is there more that she can be powerful? And yeah, I think if she would have all of it, like she kind of is not anymore like a princess. Like she doesn't use the title anymore. She doesn't has like her kingdom or the crown to pursue, and now she also is losing her magic. So yeah, she's like getting like less and less powerful, so she can maybe have her journey hero's journey. Okay, that's the way. But yeah, but it's really like interesting point of view, because in this moment when I was reading it, I wasn't thinking like, oh my god, she's losing her power to be more suitable for the rest, to don't be like you play video game and you have
Yeah.
all the powers up and you have like the highest level and no one can beat you, and it feels like this in this moment.
Yeah.
When she have it all.
But yeah, I completely agree. But through your dialogue, I was thinking, what if she really chose the path of fire magic? What if she really would become so powerful, and she would go on the way of revenge and killing and the dark side? There also could be some story where when she finds out that this life does not satisfy her, and she may renounce the magic later on. It would be completely different story, but I see that happening if the circumstances would be a little bit different. So it is, from the reader's perspective, this way is more palatable, is more easier for a reader to relate. It's still our Ciri who we love and we cheer for her and we really want her to be on the right path. And it's a brilliant way how to write a character. But I also now want the different Ciri.
Fan fiction. That's where we get that.
Yes.
Always the
Yeah.
fan fiction. Somebody come through with a link. But yeah, it's interesting that, and I think poetic. I think it's poetic that Ciri, as you brought up, Gabriela, had been lamenting the fact that people only taught her how to kill, and that was the way that she was going to help the world, was by killing and hurting people. So she's so frustrated that she doesn't have the skills necessary to heal. Granted, with the questionable use of fire magic, her last use of magic entirely is spent healing Ihuarraquax. And so that is kind of a nice, albeit dark, note to end on before she loses her magic entirely. So at least that specific note that she had for herself and that sadness that she had about not healing is kind of resolved, even a little bit, in that final display of magic.
Yeah, this is like the moment when she realized that despite that the all things she was taught by many different people, she still does like she's lacking the ability to help people, like first that they told her to kill her people, but in this moment it doesn't help, and then she's tried to resolve to the other version of herself, the sorceress, and she's trying to find the magic, and then she's also like, they told me that the magic is everywhere, but she couldn't find it, the water underneath the ground. And then she realized there's a magic, but for the moment she's like, there's no magic. Like they also lied to me. Like the two of the most important people in her world, like Geralt and Yennefer, she's in this moment she realized that there's more for her to learn, to be able to help people, and that also I think she feels heartbroken by the fact that the people she put like on the pedestal, like they were so important, and she thought that they could teach her everything what she has to know, yet they didn't mention the healing part. So yeah, this is like I really enjoyed this more. I think it's like the most powerful moment in at least for me in this chapter.
Yeah, the sentence is really I wanted to mention it, but um I didn't want to bring up the real politics of the real world into this podcast, but it is so relatable nowadays with the Ukraine war, and we are really close to it. That using violence to help save people is actually a thing that people do. And here is the Ciri in this very intimate moment, and she feels the same thing that is so relatable to me and to many people right now, that it was powerful. Yeah.
And we spoke about that quite heavily in the last chapter as well. This idea of like brotherhood, campaigns based on brotherhood with Cyprian and Stepan. And it's interesting to see both within the context of the world and in our current political landscape that she renounces that in a number of different ways. And after Ciri renounces her magic, we kind of get to the last few pages of the chapter. As we'd spoken about, this is so different from everything else that we've seen in the chapter because it is completely hopeless. We hear continually that she doesn't care. There are so many terrifying things that are happening to her. It goes on to say that one of the first things that she notices is that she has blood on her inner thighs. I assumed that this was because we had heard a lot from Yennefer and from other characters that for women, their womanhood is tied very closely to magic. And I assume that that's what that is. Ciri just very suddenly getting her period. I don't think it's like blood from anything else at the loss of her magic. And aside from that, Gabriela, you mentioned that she doesn't even stutter at the thought of somebody in this party who has the wings of a bird of prey on their helmet and is likely a Nilfgaardian, and that's what we close on. But we had glimmers of hope throughout the entire chapter. Ciri had hope through the chapter, based on her survival instinct, with Little Horse, with her like even minor uses of magic. And once all of that goes away, we end the chapter on a note of resignation, and this is now a character that we don't recognize super suddenly. And it's a very interesting and strong cliffhanger to end on.
Yeah, I was wondering if it's the Siri got at the end of the chapter, the numbness she feels like everything is like not important, and I was wondering whether it's because only the loss of the magic, or is it like just the last straw that is like, okay, I don't care anymore, I lost everything, and I don't care about anything, even about myself. how's you view this? Is it like more of the magic thing, or is it just like the last thing that went wrong?
I think it's certainly just the straw that broke the camel's back, as it were.
Yes, I was also thinking about this, and I was kind of thinking like it's maybe a very heavy foreshadowing for what is going on the next book, and maybe this was kind of a way for Sapkowski how to foreshadow what is going to happen.
Mhm.
But yeah, I at this point I also wasn't sure if the vision was what broke her, or the fire magic is what was the last straw. It's not very clear how long uh, after the fire magic incident she's laying there on the ground before the Nilfgaardian soldiers actually take her with them. I also thought that she could only passed out on the ground, and that she was dehydrated and out of herself, and maybe that's why was she so out of herself.
Mhm.
But we see some foreshadowing for the next book, I believe, and this interpretation is crushed when we read the story.
I would assume it's probably been a few hours. We know that she wakes up briefly, or we get from a narrator's voice that the beings are there, so that's probably been a little bit of time. I would imagine that if she started an enormous fire in the middle of the desert and also caused some rain and lightning, that would probably draw some attention of people. As particularly, I assumed when I was reading this that it was nighttime. I don't know if it explicitly says it was or wasn't, but I imagine that this fire scene was happening at night. So in my mind, I was just like, yeah, they probably saw the fire and they just like puttered over to it, like some wise men or something, just going through the desert to follow that column. And maybe that's how they found her. But yeah, I don't think there's anything in the text that supports that. That's just what I think I made up in my mind while reading. Um,
And no, there's a fragment that says the night sky suddenly erupted with lightning.
oh,
So
cool.
yeah.
Great. I didn't make it up entirely.
No, but when you were saying, I was like, yeah, I also imagined it was a night. Or like, are we thinking the same, or
Yeah.
is it just in the text? But
So
it's
I
in the text.
imagine like if her fire magic is as strong as it comes across or as intense as it comes across, um, I assume people would see it and they'd be like, that's weird, and then head over
Yeah,
there.
the fire, the rain, and the lightning. I don't know how often the storm is coming
Yeah.
to the desert, so it could be also like, hmm.
Yeah. Let's run toward the natural disaster.
I completely missed that.
I assume by morning. I assume it's some more time in the morning that they found her. But yeah, what a intense way to end the chapter. I think again, because it's so different from the character that we know, the resignation, and the despair that she has, and the numbness, as you said, Gabriela. She just doesn't feel anything at all. Um, and I think that's the common saying, right? The opposite of love isn't hate, it's apathy.
Yeah.
And just the fact that there's nothing left for her to give, um, is so wildly sad, for a character that that we are going to spend so much time with, and a character that we have come to love. But that's the note on which we end the chapter. As we kind of wrap up our discussion, do you guys have any final thoughts on chapter 6 of Time of Contempt?
It was great. I really enjoyed this chapter. Like, you could be there with Ciri the whole time. Like the only thing at the beginning when this insert about the unicorns and the
Mm.
virginity, I was like, really, we are doing this? A man
Yeah.
writing about virginity, and when it's best to lose it, or is it weird to keep it for so long? But then,
Yeah.
okay, I was like, okay, for the chapter, it kind of makes sense, especially when she said like, oh, the boy kissed me only once, so it doesn't count. And I was like, okay,
She
that's
is
why
clearly
she's
14.
saying this. Yes.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I often talk about the opening excerpts in our podcast discussions. I forgot to here, but yes, as you said, like it gives us a little bit more context about the cultural perception of unicorns. We know that they're supposedly extinct in the world of The Witcher, and people believe, and as she reads in Kincardi's book, that they're only attracted to virgins and they'll only interact with virgins. And Sapkowski has a tendency to turn things on their head, as we've seen in the short stories and as we'll continue to see, notably in books like Baptism of Fire. But it's one of those things that it's just like, that's interesting and a little weird. Okay.
Yeah, when I read it, I was like, rolled my eyes. I was like, okay,
Sure.
it's like the book is from 90s. It's like we have different times now.
Yeah.
But yeah, while reading the chapter, it made more sense to see the way people in this world portray the unicorns and what they think about them, and how it's not necessarily true according to Little Horse.
Hmm. What about you, Kája? Any last thoughts?
As I said in the beginning, this chapter, and I specifically ask you to, if I can cover this chapter, and I'm really happy that I was able to, because it is so different from all the other chapters in this book and in the whole series. It's very dreamlike. It's very intimate, and I enjoyed every last bit of it. I really admire how Sapkowski is able to portray the scene extremely vividly. I really feel like I'm on that desert. I really feel like I'm in Ciri's shoes. I don't have that feeling very often when there are people arguing about politics. So this chapter has really special place in my heart for me. And yeah, it was great.
As I said, this chapter is so different from any other kind of experience we have in the Witcher series thus far, with the exception of maybe one or two short stories with Geralt. But this really does feel like the decisive note for a reader that, like, hey, the rest of the books are going to be about Ciri, guys. Like, this is her coming of age. This is her story. We are crossing the thresholds into the unknown. And this is where that starts. Um, and I like the way that it's paced. I think it's paced exactly right for all the little acts that happen within it. Um, and again, masterful work on Sapkowski's part to like kind of give us that journey of desperation and hope and survival. Um, with those fantasy elements, of course, like Little Horse, like the monster fight here and there, the mysterious beings, and that fall from grace. So much happens in this chapter with just this one character, and it sets us up for a stunning journey, through the rest of the books. I'm so glad that I get to cover it with you both here as well. So, as we come to the end of chapter 6 of Time of Contempt, that is it for our show today. Gabriela, Kája, thank you so much for joining us for this episode, and thank you to Hanza for listening. So, Kája, where can people find you? And is there anything that our community can help you with, or anything that you'd like to share with them?
Yeah, I would like to share a small business that I'm trying to start with my friend. We are both web developers, and she is a great designer. And if you have any web development needs, you can find us at spacebarkeepers.com. So you can contact us there. Also, if you want to contact me directly or just chat about this episode, you can find me on Instagram. I'm there as Kája Fraja, that is KAJAFRAJA, and you can contact me there.
Lovely. And you can speak to both Gabriela and Kája in the Hanza Discord at bit.ly/the Hanza Discord, where you can chat with both of them and the rest of our community, other guests of the show, and see what everybody thinks. We can't wait to hear from you guys. Next episode, join us as we conclude our discussion of Andrzej Sapkowski's Time of Contempt with Chapter 7. Yay! Okay.
Yay.
Nice.
We did it.
You did it! Hooray! Thanks for joining us at the Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and a complete list of our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastandbeauclair.com. Breakfast in Beauclair is created by Alyssa from GoodMorhen. It's hosted by Alyssa with the Tidings from Toussaint news segment by Lois from Witcherflix. The show is edited by Alyssa with music by Alex Berner. Breakfast in Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City with Katie, the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B, Haven of the Edge of the World, Charlotte from Beckenberg Glamour, the Original Roach, Connor's Cat, Libby, John of Rivia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, James Carson III, Miriam of Temeria, and Softy. Special thanks to Gabriela and Kája for joining us for this episode, and our international Hanza for their support.